At my brother's wedding, they handed me a badge that said event staff. I stared at it for a long, sickening second. Staff? Me? I was supposed to be a sister, part of the family, a guest, someone who mattered. Instead, I was suddenly invisible, a placeholder, a person tasked with passing out plates and refilling glasses. And my mom, my controlling, perfection-obsessed mother, leaned in, close enough for only me to hear, and whispered, "Just help serve. Don't make a scene." But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip that badge off and march straight out of the venue. But I didn't. I smiled, nodded, and forced my hands to stay at my sides. Everyone around me was laughing, taking selfies, clinking champagne flutes, oblivious to the storm brewing in my chest. I'd always been the responsible one, the quiet one, the sister who followed the rules, and tonight felt like the culmination of every time I had been overlooked, underestimated, and silenced. The wedding was in a beautiful hall in Atlanta. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting soft, glittering light over perfectly arranged tables. The floral arrangements smelled faintly of jasmine and roses, and the marble floors reflected the guests' designer shoes in a way that made everything look like a scene from a glossy magazine. Ryan, my brother, the groom, was laughing with his groomsmen, completely unaware, or maybe fully aware, of the humiliation I was enduring. He had that easy charm that made people like him instantly, but sometimes charm came at a cost. For me, that cost had been written all over the badge pinned to my chest. I tried to focus on something else. The menu looked incredible. The cake was a 3-tier masterpiece with delicate sugar flowers. But my eyes kept drifting to the gift table, and that's when I noticed it. The envelope labeled Venue Payment Confirmation was tucked awkwardly among a pile of floral arrangements and unopened gifts. Something felt off. My stomach knotted. Something that had been overlooked or maybe ignored was staring me in the face. And I knew immediately that I couldn't let it go. Flashbacks hit me in fragments. Childhood birthdays where my achievements were overshadowed by Ryan's soccer trophies. Family dinners where my opinions were politely acknowledged but never acted on. High school graduations where Ryan got the spotlight, the applause, and the family photos. All of it came rushing back in a wave that made my hands curl into fists. And now, decades later, I was standing in a wedding hall, treated like a nobody, and yet, ironically, the power was in my hands. I looked down at the badge again. Small, white letters against a blue background, like a sentence that summed up every moment of my life. Invisible, inconsequential, just there to follow orders. But maybe, just maybe, it was also a key. A key to exposing mistakes that no one else would dare notice, a chance to finally make my voice heard. My mom's voice echoed again, "Don't make a scene." And for a split second, I almost believed I should obey. Almost. Then I remembered the envelope. $12,000. A venue payment that, if processed incorrectly, could have turned this perfect day into a disaster. I had worked in finance, I knew how these things worked. And as much as my mom wanted me quiet, as much as my brother wanted me invisible, I couldn't ignore it. Not this time. I made my way to the gift table, weaving carefully through the guests. Every step was deliberate, measured, but my heart was racing. I could feel eyes on me, though I tried to appear invisible. Some whispered, some stared. The wedding coordinator, Lisa, caught my eye briefly and nodded, as if sensing that I was doing more than just standing there. I took a deep breath, my hands brushing over the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. Heavier with implication, heavier with responsibility. I held it for a moment, looking at the crowd. Ryan was laughing at a joke someone told him. My mom was busy directing the florist, oblivious to the storm about to erupt. And me? I had a decision to make. Stand by silently, keep my head down, blend into the background, and let this oversight go unnoticed. Or act. Speak up. Expose the truth. Make them see me. I decided. I couldn't stay silent. Not tonight. Not ever again. My hand gripped the envelope tighter, and I took a step forward. The guests were still laughing, the champagne glasses still clinking, and the soft classical music in the background made everything feel surreal. But I knew in that exact moment that everything was about to change. I glanced over at my mom, her eyes briefly meeting mine, sharp and warning. She mouthed the words, "Don't," but it was too late. I had already made up my mind. This wedding, the picture-perfect, Instagram-ready wedding, was about to witness a quiet, calculated rebellion that no one saw coming. And I smiled, just a little, because I knew I held the power in my hands. Then I turned to the envelope again, realizing that what came next wouldn't just embarrass my family, it would reveal truths about them, about me, and about this wedding day that no one expected. And in that split second, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: control, authority, recognition, and perhaps the tiniest spark of revenge. They handed me the badge and a small, fake smile from the coordinator, Lisa, who was clearly used to people like me. "Just pin this on, and help where you can," she said, as if she were giving instructions to a volunteer who didn't matter. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Emily Carter, 27, sister of the groom, was now staff. The words echoed in my mind, sharper than any insult I had ever heard. My mom leaned close, whispering the same warning she always did in moments of perceived danger: "Just help serve. Don't make a scene." Do you know that feeling when humiliation wraps itself around you so tightly that your chest hurts? That's what it felt like. The badge was heavy, though it was just plastic. It was heavy with expectation, judgment, and decades of being overlooked. I tried to hold myself together as guests started filing in, laughing, snapping selfies, completely unaware that I was standing in plain sight, invisible. The hall was a perfect picture of opulence. Gold-rimmed chairs lined the long tables, crystal chandeliers glimmered overhead, and a soft classical string quartet filled the air. The floral arrangements were so meticulously designed that even the scent seemed curated. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. And I was not a part of it. I was the shadow, the cog in the machine, tasked with passing out plates and ensuring the champagne flowed. I moved through the crowd, nodding politely at relatives who barely looked my way. My cousin Jenna, 25, gave me a sympathetic smile, whispering, "Ignore it. Just do your job." But doing my job felt like betrayal. I wanted to storm out, to rip the badge off, to scream at my mom and my brother, Ryan, that I deserved more than this. But instead, I followed instructions, walking stiffly toward the first table that needed attending. The first emotional spike hit when I overheard Ryan laughing with his groomsmen. "Who let her in?" he joked, a smirk on his face, completely oblivious to, or maybe delighting in, the humiliation. My stomach twisted. Childhood memories flashed like strobe lights. Birthdays where my achievements were ignored, graduations where my applause was polite but fleeting, family dinners where my opinions evaporated into thin air. And tonight, decades later, history was repeating itself. I poured wine for a table of distant relatives, trying to keep my hands steady. Every smile I forced was a little lie. Every "here you go" was a silent scream. My mother passed behind me, adjusting a floral centerpiece, her eyes never meeting mine. She didn't need to. I could feel the silent command in her gaze: "Conform, Emily. Obey. Be invisible." But my eyes kept drifting to the gift table, that small altar of wrapped boxes and envelopes that represented so much more than presents. And there it was, the envelope that made my chest tighten instantly, the $12,000 venue payment confirmation. How could something so important be left in plain sight, hidden in plain sight? My mind raced. I knew I had to act. I had to step forward, but I also had to survive the humiliation. The tension in my chest built as I tried to come up with a plan. My mom's whisper still rang in my ears: "Don't make a scene." But I asked myself, how long could I let this go? How long could I stay in the shadows while mistakes, huge, glaring mistakes, went unnoticed? I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I wasn't just angry. I was calculating. And that's when I realized something important. The badge didn't make me invisible. It gave me access. Access to the truth that no one else would notice. I moved closer to the table, weaving carefully through guests who were too busy taking selfies to notice me. The coordinator, Lisa, glanced at me, her expression unreadable. A slight nod, almost imperceptible, as if she too sensed I was about to do more than my assigned role. The envelope was just within reach now. My hand hovered over it, my pulse racing. The crowd around me laughed, glasses clinked, and the music continued. Completely oblivious to the storm about to erupt. Then it hit me. This wasn't just about the badge or about being treated as invisible. This was about reclaiming a piece of myself I had lost long ago. This was about making them see me, not the sister they ignored, not the quiet one who followed orders, but Emily Carter, who wouldn't stay silent when she knew she was right. I took a slow, deliberate breath and my hand closed around the envelope. The paper was cool under my fingers, but the weight of it was immense. It wasn't just money. It wasn't just a transaction. It was a symbol of oversight, neglect, and the small injustices that had stacked up over a lifetime. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Fear was still there, but so was power. And then I looked at my mom again. Her lips parted, a whispered, "Emily, don't," barely audible, but it was too late. I had made my decision. I had a choice, and I was taking it. This wedding, this perfect, glamorous, Instagram-ready day, was about to get a shock it would never forget. I stepped closer to the envelope, the crowd blurring around me, my mind a mixture of fear, anticipation, and exhilaration. I was invisible, yes, but only until I decided I wasn't. Only until I decided to speak. And that's when I realized everyone was about to see a side of me they had never imagined. But what came next would change the course of the night. And no one, not even my brother, saw it coming. I walked toward the gift table, envelope in hand, and suddenly, the entire wedding hall seemed to shrink. Laughter echoed from one end of the room, glasses clinked, and soft music filled the air, but in my head, all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. I could feel every eye that flicked toward me, though most of the guests seemed too engrossed in their own conversations to notice. My mom, however, noticed. Her eyes locked onto mine like daggers, and her lips moved silently. "Emily, stop." But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I held the $12,000 payment confirmation tightly, crumpling it slightly with nervous fingers. The irony wasn't lost on me. The badge they forced me to wear, meant to keep me invisible, was giving me a position of undeniable authority. I was staff, yes, but tonight, staff was the one who actually knew the truth. I cleared my throat. My voice trembled for a split second, but then steadied. "You might want to check this," I said, louder this time, holding the envelope up so the nearest guests could see. The reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered in midair. A champagne glass slipped slightly in someone's hand. And then, from the corner of the hall, I saw him, my brother Ryan. His laughter froze. His smile faltered. The smirk he always wore around family and friends was gone, replaced by confusion and panic. My mom's whisper escalated to a shout, "Come back here, Emily." But I stayed where I was, my shoulders squared. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, to apologize, to blend back into the invisible background. But this time, I didn't care. Guests murmured, some pulling out phones. Some whispered among themselves, "Did she just? Is that the payment? Wow, she's bold." I caught sight of my cousin Jenna, 25, nodding slightly, a mix of admiration and relief on her face. Finally, someone in the family seemed to understand why I was doing this. Ryan stormed over, his face red, his hands flailing. "Emily, what are you doing?" His voice was a mixture of anger and embarrassment, the kind only a bride or groom's sibling could feel when a family scandal erupts in front of dozens of people. I ignored him, holding the envelope firmly, feeling an adrenaline rush I hadn't experienced since childhood. I glanced around the hall, watching as some guests started piecing it together. A few whispered questions reached me. Wasn't that supposed to be paid already? Did they mess up the venue payment? I couldn't help the small, satisfied smile that crossed my face. I was right. I had been right all along. And now everyone would see it. My mom approached, her face pale, trying to grab my arm. "Emily, this is not the time," her voice broke slightly, betraying both fear and anger. I pulled my arm away gently but firmly. For the first time, I wasn't a child. I wasn't the quiet one. I was Emily, and I would not be silenced. Ryan leaned closer, his breath hot with frustration. "You're making a scene. My wedding, our day, you're embarrassing me." I looked him square in the eyes. "No, Ryan," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "You might be embarrassed, but I'm preventing a mistake. Something you and Mom apparently overlooked." The tension in the room was palpable. Guests shuffled awkwardly, unsure whether to intervene or just watch. Phones were raised. Someone whispered, "Is she really holding the payment confirmation?" I felt the weight of the room shift. No one was ignoring me anymore. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. The venue manager, standing near the back, cleared her throat. "Actually, Emily is correct," she said. "There was an issue with the payment. This envelope confirms it." Gasps echoed through the room. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not fear, but vindication. Ryan's jaw tightened. My mom's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse, probably to distract herself. But it was too late. The truth was out. I had turned invisibility into authority. The staff badge wasn't just a symbol of humiliation anymore. It was a badge of insight, proof that I could handle responsibility even when everyone else doubted me. I glanced around the hall again. Some guests whispered, impressed. Some laughed nervously at the awkward family drama unfolding. I could feel Ryan's anger and embarrassment in waves, but it only fueled me further. My heart raced as I realized the power of simply speaking up when everyone else assumed I would stay quiet. The adrenaline made me bold. I didn't just hand the envelope to anyone. I held it high, letting everyone see it. The murmurs grew louder, and I could almost see the gears turning in my brother's head. He had no idea what to do. The bride's friends whispered, confused. The groomsmen exchanged awkward glances. And my mom, well, she was frozen, part disbelief, part fury. I didn't wait for them to respond. I stepped back slightly, my eyes sweeping across the room. "Check this," I said again, softer now, but pointedly, letting the envelope fall onto the table in front of everyone. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a fact. And everyone had to acknowledge it. Ryan opened his mouth, probably to shout, probably to pull me aside, probably to try to reclaim some sense of control, but it was too late. The crowd had shifted. Attention was mine. Validation, which I had been denied my whole life, was finally mine to command. And as I took a small step away from the table, adrenaline still surging, I realized something I hadn't expected. This was bigger than the payment, bigger than the wedding, bigger than Ryan's embarrassment. It was about me finally claiming my place in the family. But what came next would push the night to its breaking point, and no one, not even my mother, was prepared for it. By the time I stepped back from the gift table, the entire room had gone silent. The soft classical music seemed to fade into nothing. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered over plates. Champagne glasses trembled in hands that suddenly didn't know what to do. Everyone was staring at me. Everyone. And for the first time that day, I felt fully seen, not as staff, not as the overlooked sister, but as Emily Carter, the one who refused to be invisible. Ryan's face was red, a mix of anger, embarrassment, and disbelief. He looked like someone who had just discovered that his perfect little world had a flaw he hadn't expected. My mom's expression was even worse. Her eyes were wide, jaw tight, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her clutch. The words, "Come back here," seemed to die in her throat. Even my dad, usually the calm peacemaker, looked like he was silently weighing how to salvage the situation without making it worse. The venue manager stepped forward, confirming what I already knew in my bones. "Yes, Emily is correct. The payment hadn't been processed correctly. This envelope confirms it." Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Relief mixed with shock as the guests began to murmur. Some whispered, "She saved the wedding," while others exchanged awkward looks, realizing the truth. Emily, the quiet sister who everyone underestimated, had prevented a disaster. I felt a strange mix of triumph and disbelief. For years, I had let my accomplishments and insights slide into the background. Tonight, standing in front of hundreds of people, I finally mattered. And it wasn't just about saving the venue payment. It was about proving that I could act decisively, that I could stand my ground, and that I deserved recognition, even if my own family had forgotten to give it to me. Ryan finally found his voice, though it was trembling. "Emily, what are you doing?" His words were more panic than anger now, more desperation than accusation. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm making sure everything is right," I said firmly. "Something you and Mom overlooked." "I'm helping, Ryan. You should check that." The room was alive with tension. Some guests whispered excitedly, recording snippets on their phones. Some stared with admiration, clearly impressed by the courage it took to stand up in front of family and friends. And in the middle of all of it, I felt something shift in my mom. She pulled me aside quietly, her face still tight but softer. "Emily, I suppose you were right," she murmured, almost reluctantly. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was acknowledgement, the first real recognition I had gotten from her in years. I smiled faintly. It wasn't enough to erase decades of being overlooked, but it was a start. The power of truth was intoxicating. Guests who had once ignored me now gave subtle nods, and a few whispered congratulations under their breath. Even my dad, who had been quietly observing, finally stepped forward and shook my hand, his way of saying, silently, that he noticed, that he respected what I had done. But the night wasn't over. Ryan, flushed with embarrassment and frustration, tried to regain control, attempting to dismiss the moment as nothing. "It's fine, Emily," he said stiffly. "Everything's under control." But no one believed him anymore, not after seeing the payment confirmation, not after witnessing me stand tall in a role they thought was insignificant. The real twist came when I glanced back at the badge pinned to my chest. The small, plastic staff badge, meant to diminish me, now symbolized authority, insight, and courage. How ironic it was that something intended to humiliate me had given me the leverage I needed to finally be heard. That badge, that night, became a badge of honor. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a reflective calm. I looked around at the family who had tried to keep me in the shadows, at the guests who were silently applauding my courage, and at my mom, who was now processing the reality she had ignored for so long. I realized something important. Validation isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes in small acknowledgments. Sometimes it comes in the shock of realizing that someone you overlooked can save the day. The rest of the evening unfolded in a surreal haze. Ryan tried to regain composure, attempting to make jokes and redirect attention to the wedding festivities. Mom busied herself with the flowers, her tone quieter now when she spoke to me. And I walked among the guests, exchanging subtle smiles, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having claimed my space. And yet, even in triumph, I knew the story wasn't over. Family dynamics don't shift overnight. Old patterns linger, even when moments like this force recognition. But something had changed. For the first time, I knew my voice mattered, and that knowledge, powerful, intoxicating, and irrevocable, would stay with me forever. I glanced down at the badge one last time, still pinned to my chest, and couldn't help the small smile that crept across my face. Funny, I thought, how a little piece of plastic could hold so much weight. Not just in the room, not just in that moment, but in my life. In that instant, I realized I had transformed invisibility into authority, humiliation into empowerment, and oversight into triumph. And as I walked away from the table, surrounded by the clinking glasses and murmurs of astonishment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This night, this wedding, would be remembered. Not for the flowers, not for the cake, not even for the vows. It would be remembered for the sister who refused to stay invisible, who dared to act, and who finally made them all see her. As I walked away from the gift table, the weight of the badge pressed lightly against my chest, I realized something that had been simmering inside me for years. I had been invisible for far too long. Not just tonight, not just in this hall filled with chandeliers and floral arrangements, but in my family, in my own life. And for the first time, I had reclaimed that visibility on my terms. The evening unfolded around me like a surreal dream. Guests whispered and smiled, some still shocked, some quietly impressed. My cousin Jenna gave me a small nod of approval, a silent acknowledgement that said more than words ever could. My mom, usually so sharp and commanding, had stepped back, watching me with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant respect. Even my dad, always the observer, had found a quiet way to show me that he noticed, that he appreciated what I had done. For a fleeting moment, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in my entire life. And yet, the victory wasn't about recognition. It was about standing up when it mattered. About refusing to be sidelined, even when everyone else expected me to be quiet. About speaking the truth, even if it made some people uncomfortable. The envelope I held that night, a simple confirmation of a $12,000 payment, had become a symbol. A symbol of power, accountability, and courage. It reminded me that even small actions, taken at the right moment, could ripple through a room, through a family, through a lifetime. I looked back at Ryan. He was trying to recover, attempting to redirect attention to the wedding festivities, trying to save face. I felt a strange mix of emotions, satisfaction, yes, but also empathy. He had been blindsided, embarrassed, and perhaps even shaken by the realization that the sister he often overlooked could hold authority where he had assumed control. Family dynamics rarely shift in an instant, but I could feel the subtle change in the air. Something had cracked, a pattern had shifted, and I was no longer invisible in his eyes or anyone else's. Mom approached me quietly, a little later, when the crowd was distracted. Her voice was low, almost reluctant. "Emily, I suppose you were right." It wasn't a full apology, not a heartfelt confession, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the first step toward real change. I nodded, feeling a quiet sense of closure. Not everything in our family was fixed, but the scales had tipped, if only slightly, in my favor. As the night wore on, I reflected on the odd irony of it all. A badge meant to humiliate me, meant to render me invisible, had instead become my emblem of authority. A piece of plastic had shifted power dynamics, highlighted mistakes, and forced everyone to recognize my presence. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. Sometimes the smallest, most mundane things carry the heaviest weight. Sometimes the most humiliating circumstances become the stage for the greatest victories. Walking among the guests, exchanging polite nods, I felt a calm I hadn't expected. The tension of earlier had ebbed, replaced by a quiet confidence. I realized that what I had learned that night wasn't just about weddings or badges or overlooked payments. It was about myself. About knowing my worth. About trusting my judgment. About having the courage to act even when it's uncomfortable, even when those around you are poised to dismiss your voice. And then it hit me. This night, this entire wedding would not be remembered for the flowers, the vows, or even the cake. It would be remembered for me. Not in a loud, boastful way, but in the quiet impact I made, the moment when truth was spoken and action was taken, when one sister refused to be invisible any longer. That, I realized, was far more powerful than any wedding spotlight, any applause, or any approval I had chased my whole life. As I glanced down one last time at the staff badge pinned to my chest, I laughed softly. Funny how something so small, so intended to diminish, could empower me in ways no one could anticipate. It had become more than a badge. It was a statement, a lesson, a reminder. That courage often hides in the most unexpected places. That authority doesn't always come from titles, wealth, or social standing. It comes from standing up when it matters most. I straightened my shoulders and walked through the hall, feeling the subtle shift in how people looked at me. Respect. Recognition. Perhaps a hint of awe. And as I passed Ryan, who avoided my gaze, I knew he understood something now. The sister he had underestimated had always been capable of more than he or anyone realized. The night would end. The wedding would continue. Guests would leave, conversations would fade, and life would go on. But for me, something permanent had shifted. I had learned that invisibility is a choice only others try to impose on you, but courage, determination, and integrity are choices you make for yourself. That realization, quiet, powerful, irrevocable, would stay with me far beyond any wedding, any family argument, any badge pinned to my chest. And as I slipped quietly out of the hall, still feeling the weight of the badge, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This night, this moment, had changed everything. Not just for my family, but for me. And sometimes, the smallest act of courage, the act of simply standing up, can echo far longer than anyone expects.